Well, why don't we go ahead and get started, since I think I know we have limited time. So we're really lucky to have, Maddy Lowman here, and she is a PhD in counseling education and counseling and, clinician as well. And so, we're just grateful to have her a part of this team and on the mental health, team. So, she's gonna be talking about grace and compassion, for yourself and others today. So, let us open in a word of prayer. Gracious, loving God, Lord, we just give thanks for this time together and this time to reflect on ourselves and the ways that we can be better, and just ask that you be with all of those who are here and this whole church, and we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you. All right, what's this? Is that better, or is this fine? Otherwise, yeah, here we go. All right, well, good morning. I'm glad to see y'all. My name is Maddy Lowman, and I'm excited to be talking about mental health today. And thank you, Caroline, for our prayer and introduction. We're going to be walking through a couple different things today, but I wanted to anchor us a little bit into what you can get into while we're here. We're going to talk about caring for yourself, caring for others, some of the barriers that come up for folks when it comes to either of those things. And then we'll talk about how to extend grace for other folks when we know that they're having a hard time. I think that can be a challenging part of relating to others. This is a little bit, I know it's a wordy slide, but a little bit of info to tie you in case you weren't able to make it to Caroline's session last week. We talked a little bit about signs and symptoms of mental health and things that you might look out for in yourself and other people. I think that part of what we're trying to do as a mental health task force is really normalize conversations around wellness. And that can be a challenging thing to do, I think, in groups. And it's hard to really even sit with times that we're struggling on our own. And so that's what I'm hoping to give a little bit more information about today, about kind of cues that clue you into maybe this is a time that I'm needing more support, and maybe how I can extend support to others if I notice those cues in others. Caroline talked a little bit about adjustment disorders, and one way of normalizing that's something that clinicians will use as a diagnosis. That my summary of that diagnosis is really just like things are challenging for this person. You're having a normal response to things that are hard, and so now we have a way that we can bill insurance and have some counseling sessions around that struggle. So sometimes folks have varying severity for symptoms and what comes up for them with mental health, and impairment looks different across people. So really my hope today is to normalize that impairment is I think a part of living. It would be very unrealistic to assume that we can move through everything that life throws at us without having much disruption. And sometimes, unfortunately, that's the expectation that we have of ourselves. And so really want to normalize that it's okay to be having a hard time with things. We even have some diagnoses that support that understanding that you're having a normal response to something that's pretty disruptive. And this is how we can get some support around it. So you can have mental health symptoms that come from a response to a big life transition or really something smaller. And so really, we're not really thinking about the scope of the event, but really the symptoms that come through the impact that the event has on us. I work specifically as a trauma specialist, and so I work with folks who experience all kinds of traumatic responses, and that can come from experiences such as assault or abuse, but also, I changed my job, I lost a loved one, I became a parent, and all of those things can come with different levels of disruption, and it's all about the person and kind of what comes up for them and what they're getting stuck in. And so that's how I think about trauma, and that's how I define trauma. I think sometimes folks expect it to be a really big, huge event. I think about it more as the response that the body holds on to a little bit longer after that event has ended. And so it's like this thing happened, I had a hard time, and I'm still having a hard time with it. And so I want to get some support, and that's usually where I meet folks with in therapy. And so seeking support can certainly be a part of the conversation that we'd like to have more as a congregation. and normalize that it's fine. Like this is in the same way when you have a headache that doesn't go away for a couple of weeks, you might go see a doctor. In the same way, if you're noticing sadness or anxiety that lingers, you can check in with a mental health counselor and get some support in that way. I have a pretty conversational approach to spending time with folks as a therapist, so I do have some prompts, and I'd love to hear from you all and what you think about some of these pieces. And if you're not feeling as participatory, that is fine, we can roll with that too. But I'd love to see what comes to mind for folks. How do we know that we need support? What comes to mind for you when you think about your own cues that, hey, I'm really having a hard time here? What stands out for people?
Isolation.
Yeah, self-isolating, and maybe withdrawing from groups or peers. How about others?
The word grace. Sometimes, I've heard the word grace all my life, and sometimes I still feel like I don't completely understand what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And there was something about extending grace. And is that forgiving yourself and others? Is it just giving people a break? I mean,
Yeah, what do y'all think? Does that spark any kind of thoughts for others? What grace might have to do with this conversation?
definitely extending it to yourself.
Yeah, and welcoming maybe just some understanding. Yeah, Karen?
I think just accepting that there's just moments of life that are hard and we are hard on ourselves and think we're supposed to face everything perfectly, depending on how we were raised. And say, wait, I can back off, or I can say no, or setting other boundaries, or getting some help. Because my mind, when you talk about cues, your mind's so occupied with this one topic or feelings, you can't really focus on anything else. So.
Yeah.
Maybe sometimes you have to heal before you can extend grace. You may not be in that place yet,
Absolutely.
so also understanding that that's okay too.
Yeah, and you mentioned acceptance as well. I think that one thing I work a lot on with people is there can be a lot of value judgments placed on our own struggle. And so a lot of people might say, like, I'm having a hard time with my partner, and that's an issue. I feel guilty about that. Or I'm there's a lot of different versions of that. And I think oftentimes in working with folks around, like, what if it's not good or bad, it's just true. Like, it's just true that you're feeling anxious. It feels bad, I'm sure, as well. But if we can neutralize that as just feedback versus like a moral failure or a real barrier that's getting in your way, and it can really get in your way, right? I experience a range of mental health pieces on my own as well. And I'm a therapist who goes to therapy. I think it can be really supportive to just have a community that you get support in, especially in this type of field. And so what if it's not good or bad? It's just true. It's just true that you're feeling sadness here. What if we spend time with that and then allow that emotion to pass? And then I wonder if you can make more sense of it later. Part of what I specialize in is stress physiology. So I think about how the body holds on different responses in the nervous system and what lingers. And I think even when we're working with kiddos too, this is really just like, I think, parenting 101. I'm still trying to embody it as a parent. But when you're in a stress response, you kind of lose functioning. This is very reductionistic, but you lose access to your frontal lobe in a way that really makes it hard to think, plan ahead, make decisions. And so sometimes when we try to think about our feelings, we're in a stress response, we really can't think about them. We need to experience them. And sometimes thinking about our feelings is a way of distancing that kind of gets in our way of coping. And so part of what we'll talk about today is the fact that what if these emotions that are rising, they're not good or bad, they're just true, and we can be with them as they are, and then maybe circle back and try to do some understanding, some insight building, and pieces like that once we have moved through our initial stress response. And that's something that can take a lot of practice. It is a natural response, but there's also a lot of natural barriers that get in the way too. So I think it's pretty normal to have some struggle with this process just because of who we are and the community that we experience. These are some signs that you might notice in yourself and other folks that let you know you might need a little bit more support. My biggest one is disruptive sleep. I am experiencing this right now in a big way. I've had a pretty big month in April with some work transitions, a sick child for what seems like eternity. And my sleep is feeling like, it's taking me a really long time to fall asleep, and that's not always true for me. So disruptive sleeps can be feedback that you're holding on to things. I've got a lot of racing thoughts. Sometimes I'll ruminate. I'll have that kind of never ending to-do list in my mind about don't forget this, don't forget this. And it kind of just cycles over and over. You might have low patience with other folks. That kind of makes us a little rigid, or you might feel a little bit shorter with your loved ones, with your pets. That can be a big cue as well. You might have some chronic pain, body aches, and different kind of pain patterns in your stomach, headaches. You might have a tight back. I've got a pain pattern right behind the shoulder that flares up as soon as I experience some overwhelm. And so the body gives us a lot of feedback about things that we might be holding on to. And it's the things that you find yourself almost just tolerating day in and day out, that they kind of like that low burn, or you can have the big spikes, right? Where you have almost like an injury that you need to attend to with the massage or other things like that. And perhaps you're experiencing challenges with focus. Focus is one of, just like I was sharing with you all, when you're in a stress response, it's harder to use your frontal lobe, which helps with thinking, planning ahead, and making decisions. And focus is there too. So you might find that you're reading the same paragraph 100 times. If you're trying to comprehend something, that can be a feedback about stress. That maybe you're just holding a lot, and your mind is having a hard time sinking in, settling, being present with what you're trying to consume, and moving forward. So those can all be cues. I'm curious if these resonate with folks, or if you've got any other ideas of signs that you experience. My dreams are a big one. I start having some weird dreams when that's usually one of my signs. I'm like, oh, I need to like center. Because I often experience stress without disruptive dreams, but that's a big one for me.
People often change their eating habits when they're.
Absolutely, yeah, food and diet, and kind of just the way you approach food can certainly vary when you're stressed.
Self-harm.
Self-harm is a big one, absolutely. And that can be, one form of trying to find some affective release and coping with overwhelm. So that can be, all of these, and including self-harm, can be symptoms of the stress, right? So it's almost like that's the thing we see, but the problem is a little bit ahead of it, right?
And then in a younger person, it would be acting out.
Yep. And toddlers, behavior is the language, right? And that's true for us too. Behavior is the language. So our own social withdrawal, or withdrawal from peers, more use on technology or social media, to feel connected, but also removed from folks. There can be a huge range in how this shows up. Even when we know we need a break, sometimes it's challenging to take one. So I'm curious if you all have any examples of barriers that you experience from taking care of yourself. So what gets in the way? So maybe you've noticed these signs like, oh, my back has been hurting for 2 weeks, or my stomach is really unsettled, or I'm not eating and my sleep is different, but I don't feel like I can actually take a break. What kinds of barriers get in the way of that?
Work, kid schedules.
Time, yep. Work and kid schedules. How about others?
Denial.
Absolutely. So the belief that like, if I power through this, or it's not that big of a deal.
Guilt.
Yep, absolutely.
Embarrassment.
Some shame, maybe. Yeah, it can be really common you get this feedback from yourself, and I think I've been in this own holding pattern for myself the last month. It's like I have a lot of feedback that I need to slow down, and I also don't feel like I have a lot of opportunities to slow down. So it's kind of just like the wheel is turning and it's hard to get off, right? So common barriers: guilt, lack of time, believing that you don't actually need a break. And I think that this one really stands out to me when I'm working with folks around like the guilt they feel about the symptoms they're experiencing. Now I work with trauma survivors. I most often work with survivors of assault and violence. And so there can be a lot of guilt and shame that comes with that experience. But I find that families experience this, parents experience this of like, I need to pour so much into my loved ones and I don't have anything else for myself. And if I take time for myself, it means that I'm taking something from a person I'm responsible for. And that can be a real barrier as well. And something that can normalize that is it doesn't have to be good or bad that you need a break. It doesn't mean you failed because you need a break. It's just true. If we take that as feedback around how to support the need, I think that can really go a long way. When I'm working with folks, an example that I'll give on this specific piece, I'm kind of just neutralizing what the information is. It's just data, it's just feedback. But when I have done all right with my water consumption for the day, which doesn't always happen. But when I've done excellent, I need to use the bathroom. And I feel that in my gut, I feel that in my whole body, right? And sometimes you're kind of just really trying to get through the next session to make it to the bathroom. And then I go, I relieve myself, I come back and I move through things. But if I have to wait like 2 hours until I can go to the bathroom, it's all I can think about. It pulls all my attention, takes all my focus. And it's a pretty unpleasant experience. This is true of anxiety. This is true of depression. This is true of different stress and panic as well. That if you address the need, the feedback, the cue, that you get in your body around the symptom, address it. The anxiety is just true. I don't feel like a failure because I've drank water and I need to pee. I just go do that. I allow myself to tend to that need. And that's so neutral to me. It doesn't feel good or bad. It's just true feedback. That can also be the case of mental health, right? That when these symptoms come up, it doesn't have to mean, I think sometimes we get in the way when we're trying to understand what it means. I think we can get there after we address the symptom itself. So if we can allow this to just be feedback, like when I'm hungry, I'll grab a snack. That's just feedback for me. Once I have the snack, I actually have a lot more ability and capacity to be present with what's happening, and then move through things. I don't have to make it mean too much. And that can certainly be true with how the body holds stress and how we hold on to lingering mental health symptoms as well. Other barriers that I notice for myself and for others, sometimes people don't know where to start. So sometimes I feel overwhelmed, I feel burned out, and that's not a really creative place for me. I'm not thinking like, oh, there's 17 different things I could do to take care of myself right now. I wonder like which I'll pick from this menu. Sometimes it's harder to access when you're in that point. A lot of times we're prioritizing others. So once everybody has what they need, I'll get what I need. And I think we can be doing that for quite some time, right? Or the belief that self-care has to be expensive. So sometimes that self-care, I think it's being talked about more often now, but it can look like lavish things or real big retreats. It also, we're talking about kind of daily maintenance things. What helps me get through my day to day? That's actually a lot more sustainable form of self-care than kind of taking a big break and pause out of everything. Now, the big break and pause is great, but it's not always accessible. So I'd love for us to think a little bit about how our faith connects here. So how does our faith guide our understanding about caring for ourselves and others? What comes to mind for you all? As we're taking in this information about, we've got cues that give us feedback. There are barriers that get in the way of us taking care of that feedback. But where does faith tie in?
I always look at the book of Psalms.
Yeah, can you say more?
It's just, the book of Psalms has so many parables and ideals and cues that you can fine tune to fit today's needs, and adapt them to fit what you need today. And there's always peace that goes with it for all sorts of trauma to daily stresses.
Absolutely. Yeah, it sounds like you can find some affirmation while you're reading. Yeah, thank you. How about others?
Just the scripture that's in both the Hebrew and the New Testament, love your neighbor as yourself.
Beautiful. Any other ideas come up?
I'll just throw out is repeatedly that God loves you, Jesus loves you.
Absolutely, simple as that. And I think, sometimes that's where we can come as a congregation, as a church body, to support folks that are struggling. We can normalize things. We can say, hey, it's like actually, we all have been in a state of challenge, and people vary. The intensity of that challenge varies, but we can all lean in and we can all offer some grace or just acceptance about like, maybe you need more patience from me. Maybe you're needing a little bit of space from me. That's fine. Now, of course, if I'm navigating my own challenges at that same time, it's gonna be a lot harder for me to be very gracious and patient with others. And that is kind of why we circle back to why wellness for ourselves is really important. Yeah, Jack.
I think of faith is a positive answer to what most of the time might be negative mental health problems, guilt feelings, etc.
Mhm.
So it's an alternative that's a lot more productive.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have worked with people in in Burlington, so rural areas in North Carolina and South Carolina. And I think faith kind of varies in its support for people, right? Sometimes faith can be something that's actually quite painful for folks, depending on how and where they grew up. And sometimes faith is a real anchor for people. They feel really rooted in their stuff. I also work with a lot of people who are like, I've tried praying about this for the last 15 years, and I'm still experiencing a lot of pain around it. And so now I'm in counseling. I'm going to try to get support. I do some faith-based counseling, and the goal there is to lobby the person's own resource. So if prayer is supportive to them, they can use that. And connect with the pain that they're experiencing, but also that you can actively engage with what you're experiencing too, right? Like we can talk, I can help you and work through like, what can we rearrange in your week to allow a little bit more space? How can we change how you're interacting in this relationship to allow you a little bit more rhythm and ease in your life? So that you also can access prayer or your faith community with more vitality and more presence. Because sometimes mental health and struggles, they interfere with that vitality and presence. So when we're thinking about, for myself, when I was thinking about how to prepare for the day, grace and compassion, what that means is sometimes I need to get out of my own way because I'm really trying to figure out the meaning of things before I just let them air out. And so grace for myself means that it doesn't matter that I'm experiencing this, it's just true. And I have, my faith in Christ allows me some strength in moving through that. I don't have to earn support around this. I can seek support around this. And that's what grace for myself can mean. And so I have a couple pieces, and these are printed out for you all too, so you can walk away with them in case they're supportive to you. But I've talked a little bit already about the value judgments can get in the way of care. So my examples, when I'm thirsty, I'll get some water. That's pretty neutral. It's just feedback. But when I'm sad and I try to ignore it, that ignoring action now becomes my value judgment on it. This is negative. I can't pay attention to this. And then we come up with symptoms. And that actually interferes with the body allowing some natural release around the experience too. So that's part of the thing that can kind of complicate what's already happening. I think the impact over intent conversation can be helpful around mental health in that, sometimes I certainly might not mean to harm myself or other people. And if the impact is true that I did, that's something that I can interact directly with. And so I think sometimes allowing yourself, especially with your own mental health experience, of like, perhaps they didn't, I know my mom made that comment and she was really trying to be kind to me, but it really landed wrong with me. And I should just ignore it and let it go. But I've been thinking about it for a week. And so maybe that's feedback for me that, oh, the impact is real. I can be with that. I have hurt around that. That really hurt the way that it landed with me, even if she didn't mean it to be that way. But I can still acknowledge that that was my reality and that it would be okay for me to seek support maybe from my partner or a friend, and allow my relationship with my mom to I can come back to it, right? But I can be with how it landed with me in the first place. Sometimes it's not good or bad, it's just true. So we want to neutralize the needs. And I have a link on the resource slide that's at the end. And it's with Milk and Honey Therapy, which is something I used to work with. They actually have a great website if you're into any kind of online resources, and they have a 5-step handout on how to feel your feelings. I think sometimes people are like, I feel anxious, but I don't know what to do about that after I name it. And this is a really applied tool. So I linked it for you all, and you can find it online. But a shorter version of how to feel things might be feel, deal, heal. So name your emotion, allow it to be true, that's how we address the feeling. So if I'm anxious, maybe some deep breath is supportive, but telling myself I shouldn't be nervous is not as supportive, right? But I can take some deep breath. That's actually going to help reset some of my system. I'll allow that stress response to kind of wash over, and then I can move forward, right? Then I can offer or try to do some of the healing work around, do I have to keep getting in this pattern? Is it, is it still serving me? Sometimes it's not. I think I'm working with folks a lot of times in session with that of like, the way you learn to navigate or cope with that experience made a lot of sense. But here, 20 years later, maybe that same modality is not serving you as well. Maybe it's coming up with some disruption or it's getting in your way of closer relationships because you're very protective or guarded, right? And so that can be a common thing that comes up for people as well. So I think if we can allow ourselves, name the feeling, be with it first, and then you can circle back to kind of what it means. That could be a helpful route. I think extending grace to others is a harder piece sometimes, especially given that we might be navigating our own stress response, and that can get in the way of how compassionate we can be with other people. And here are some tips that I might offer on how to support folks when you notice, I don't know that they're doing well, they're really pulling away from me. That's actually a really hard thing for me to engage with when I have close people. I know you're not doing well, and I know you don't want to talk about it. I think as a therapist, that's a harder thing for me. So I'm surrounded by folks who might need more solo time to process before they can do some verbal processing, and that can just be true. So I'll say it might require some self-regulation first to allow yourself to know your own process. Hey, it's hard for me that I know you're struggling and you're not coming to me, or it's hard for me that you don't know that you're struggling. So for any family members with addiction, that can be a really common experience. There's a lot of frustration that we can hold around, like, I know this person has a thing to address and they're not doing it. So that can make it harder for me to extend grace to that person, right? Because I'm having my own response. So allow yourself to consider self-regulate first. And then maybe if you're feeling, so be with the first couple slides. And then if you're feeling able to offer support and grace and compassion, that's where you can take a look at this place. So if you're in emotion-focused supporting role, trust what people say is their reality. I work with parents all the time who are having a hard time with the intensity of their teens' experience. And, sometimes I'll just say, we got to trust that what they're saying is real. The feeling is real. We'll circle back to the content, but we really do need to be with the emotion first. I'm going to believe what you say is true for you and really sink in and say, what do you need right now with that emotion? Then we're going to circle back to the content after again. One thing that I say to folks all the time is if you're not sure how to support somebody, just ask. You can say, hey, do you want advice or do you want to vent? I think sometimes, a lot of times we can have a lot of frustration with others if I'm always getting the call from my same friend who has the same problem for years. And I'll get some frustration because I'll be like, if you had done what I said 6 months ago when we talked about this, here we are. But you can just ask, I can ask that friend, hey, do you want me to steer you out? Because I've got plenty of space and time for that. But if I'm going to put some energy and momentum into crafting this plan with you, I should probably make sure you want it. And make sure that I have an informed consumer, right? And so really just ask, check in with folks. I think this has helped a lot of my family relationships a lot more around do you just want space to be where you are, or are you wanting to problem solve? Because I could be in either, and then I don't have to get disrupted on my own. I don't have to get so distressed and frustrated because you're not doing the thing that I put a lot of energy into helping you, right? And so that's a great tool that I use a lot. I think too, we can normalize, it's all right for you to set limits on your availability to other folks, right? We all have limits to what we can support people with energetically, but also time and financially. And so it's okay for you to say, I really care for you deeply. I hear that you're going through a lot. I'm only able to talk during this time today, or, I would love to help you connect with somebody at the church to connect with, maybe a therapist in the area. You're able to set some limits on how available you are to folks. And that can be fine too. That also is a way that you can model your own wellness. And say, I want to be here with you and I have a lot going on for me too. let's put a pin in this and circle back, or let me help you get to someone who can do more for you right now. But that's fine to do as well. So some boundary setting can be A-okay when you're trying to extend grace and support to other people. I think sometimes when we don't boundary set and we say, well, I should be able to really support this person in a lot of pain, even though I have a lot going on in my own life, that's where like, that really can tear things apart at the seams, right? That I should be able to do X, Y, or Z that can really get in the way, where it's just true that I'm at capacity and I want to support this person and hear them and see them, and that might be elsewhere, right? So that can be a big thing too. For those of us who might be empaths or really emotion-laden folks, myself included, I really do have to boundary my workday from client to client, but also from like, I'm transitioning from therapist to like returning home to be with my family or to be in my friend. Like, you know, that really has to be an energetic shift on what I can extend for folks. And that really can depend on the workday. And that's true for anybody in any occupation. But if you have any kind of helping role in your work life, it might be a lot harder for you to show up that way in your personal life. And that can just be true. It doesn't have to be feedback about anything in particular, just something to pay attention to.
I have another thought in this area.
Yeah, what's up?
I hear some comments sometimes from people who come to me, and it's also recognizing that people, you maybe recognize that something's going on, right? So a way of extending grace is to be available, to pray quietly for them, but you may not need to know the whole story. Or you only know pieces of it, and sometimes people get offended. Well, why don't they tell me all about it? You know, I'm here for them. Or, so that becomes that judgment piece, right? But sometimes an extending grace is just that you are there, you're kind to them, you are praying, you offer for help, and let it be. Because maybe you're not that person that can be there for them the way they need it, and it's okay. Nothing's bad about that.
It makes me think of like another phrase that can be supportive is that you can allow yourself to pay more attention to process over content. And so I do this a lot as a therapist because I really hold on to things that I hear. I'm very auditorily sensitive to things because I hear about a lot of pain and really horrific things. And so allowing myself, I'm going to pay attention to how you're experiencing this right now. I want to be with how you're feeling right now, instead of asking more content questions. So I actually do that on purpose. I don't ask more about the details for sometimes when I'm in that role, because that's protective for me. That's a way to work with a boundary. But yeah, other people, they might not want to share more details. They just want somebody to know that they're having a hard time, and that can be enough, right? And that can also be a place that, do you want advice or support? Do you want to talk more, or is that enough? You know, are you available for them to circle back? Sometimes I'll say that to friends, or I'm like, if you want to come back to that later, I'm still here. Or if you want to come back to that later, I'm very available over the weekend. And so you can give yourself some parameters too for that. So now we're going to spend some time together just chatting. And so we could probably have two groups, I would say, unless y'all want to stay as a bigger group. We have a smallish. Okay, thumbs up for the big group. All right, we'll stay in a big group. All right, we're gonna consider and we're gonna break out together. What would it be like if we offered grace to ourselves when we struggle? This is a very intentionally open question, so I'd love to hear how folks are making meaning of it. What comes up for you when you read that first one?
Remember to stop and forgive yourself.
Yeah, and sometimes that can be a real challenging step of the process, right?
And to think about, if you would give grace to someone for the same thing they just did, why aren't you giving yourself the same amount of respect that you gave someone else?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I found that self-talk, I find myself doing negative self-talk, and I have to stop and do cognitive restructuring, just to focus a different way to think.
Absolutely. That makes me think of something that I think a lot of folks experience is self-criticism and critical self-talk as a way of coping. So sometimes you're really trying to help ourselves out of a hole by saying you shouldn't be here, this is what you should have done differently. And it can take on a self-criticism kind of feel. but it starts off as something really we're trying to support ourselves around, like, perhaps we're trying to parent ourselves, give some feedback, right? We're trying to allow ourselves to see the holes, how did I get here, how can I do it differently? But over time and after many years, that can really be a hard inner critic to let go of, right? And sometimes that gets in the way of healing for the rest. So I think that critical self-talk thing is huge. And sometimes just the reframe, the cognitive restructuring can be really generative of like, okay, I did my best. This isn't where I want to stay. Instead of, I can't believe I'm here again, right? So just a quick shift in the language can be really meaningful. Thanks for that. Yeah.
I heard a talk recently, from a priest actually, and he talked about the syndrome. If I were kinder, thinner, smarter,
Yeah.
and that from his point of view, which I agree with, is Jesus came to release us from that
Mhm.
through his mercy and grace.
Mhm.
He was here to release us from being her,
Yeah, that's beautiful.
because we do that to ourselves all. And to remember that
Mhm.
I haven't succeeded
Yeah.
in that at all,
Mhm.
but it's a way of maybe shifting sometimes to think, oh, I'm in that rabbit hole.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point too, of just like around how grace ties into the conversation is as I am is enough. Like, as I show up right now, that is enough for God's love. That is enough for the promise that we have, as a faith community. And that I'm saying that very often to folks in counseling too, like, there's nowhere you need to be that you're not. We're gonna sink in right here. This is what's true right now. We're gonna be with it. When you have access to more to do something different, you will. I know you're motivated for that, and so let's be with what's true right now. And so the same thing for grace, like, as I am, as I struggle, that's fine, like, that is what Christ came for, right? Any other thoughts coming up? Yeah.
I think people set goals and expectations for themselves way higher than they should and way higher than might for other people.
Mm-hmm.
And when they don't meet those goals and expectations, they blame it on themselves and feel bad about it. Whereas the goals are much higher than they would say, except for whether they're coworkers or somebody else.
Absolutely. That makes me think too, that really can blend into that inner critic of, like, my goal was set up here. It probably wasn't realistic for me in the first place, but now I'm gonna use that as data that I failed. Or that I can't live up, or I should be smarter or quicker or faster, whatever. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Just kind of getting caught in those shoulds.
That should.
The shoulds.
That
And it always makes me laugh when I hear someone say, the shoulds will shit all over you or something like that. And it's true, I mean, it's crass, but it is true, like, sometimes I have to stop people and be like, I'm hearing a lot of shoulds.
Yeah,
So let's just stop right there.
should we stop?
Yeah, yeah. So, I also think for me, it's knowing what fuels my soul. You know, so for me, it's out for a walk and it's out gardening and it's making sure I'm taking the time, because that's my process time. It's also my time to kind of, I don't know, convene with God, rejoice in life. But I know if I don't have enough of that, then that's where I start to tip over, right? So making sure I'm keeping that balance.
So more grace for yourself might be more attention to the routine that supports you, when you're able to access that. Yeah.
I think for me, I've always thought that things should be, like instant gratification, like I've heard something bad has happened. And I should automatically, like, I should feel better in one day, but now, like, for me, looking back, and I had a really bad work experience, and now it's been like 2 years, and I feel so much better that looking back, I'm like, it's okay to take 2 years to heal from something, like, it doesn't have to be the next weekend, I'm happy and back at, you know, all of these things are like triggers that you might see or hear, or, you know, those kinds of things that, for me now, I feel like I've healed and understand now that it takes time, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Celebrate your daily joys, no matter how small they may seem, celebrate those little things to big things. Like, you did have a klutzy moment today, Jeanette, yay. find fun in it.
Yeah.
I read the book, The Body Keeps the Score, which your presentation,
Yeah.
is great, and that is also ways that I find ways to give myself grace for finding those, because not all the self-help books speak to me, but finding ones that do.
Mm-hmm.
And if I bought one that didn't work, just pass it on.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that, and a lot of kind of flexibility in it. I think when we're in a time of stress, we get really rigid. That's just part of how the body experiences stress. So that rigid response, when I'm short with people, if I don't have patience with people, if I'm feeling like something's gotta change right now or I'm gonna explode, that's feedback. That maybe I need a little bit more grace, like, okay, I'm really holding some stuff. I do need to pause. I do need to tend to myself. I need to see what my body needs and what could be supportive. So I think that feels huge. How about for others? What could we change if we plan for extra support in times of transition rather than power through and feel like we failed or impacted by our reality? It's a wordy one, but
Yeah.
I think for myself, I do get into like the pace. Okay, I'm really impacted by pace. Sometimes I can overcommit to things. And sometimes I need to like very intentionally decline other things. And that's not a thing I have a natural rhythm with. So usually I find myself a little overbooked. And so if I plan for extra support around that and in the way that I schedule my day, my week, if I allow myself like, hey, husband, when I get home, I need to change my clothes, wash my face and have a glass of water before I pick up my baby. That actually really goes a long way for me. And it doesn't happen without help. That will not happen. It will not be true unless he says, okay, got it. I'm gonna take her into the next room. You come out when you're ready. And that really opens up a lot of wellness for me.
Always having a viable plan B.
Absolutely.
You don't necessarily have to use it, but you have it if you need it.
Yeah, a little backup.
That can apply in almost any situation.
Mhm.
You're flying an airplane or whatever, you gotta have an out.
Absolutely. And that it's okay to take it out. It doesn't have to be extreme circumstances that you allow yourself access to that out, right? That it could just be like, this is actually gonna be really supportive for me. I'm gonna take it. Yeah.
If I'm writing affirmations on the bathroom mirror, because it forces you to look at yourself while you say the affirmation. So if there's something you need to work on in yourself, it really helps because when you look at yourself to say it, you tend to start to believe it in a more productive manner.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Any other thoughts?
I have one about transitions, because transitions about everyday life, we all have babies going on, but there's just natural transitions of life, and I think they're so unrealistic. We're so hard on ourselves about how we think we're gonna be a new mom or a new dad or a new marriage, a new job, whatever it is. We're aging, our bodies are changing. So I think, it's just normal to expect that we need extra help or support during all of these things that go on in life. Learning how to navigate them. I've never been there before, so it's okay.
Because my sister said, don't rob other people as their blessings for helping you. Spoken like a true big sister, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you say that again? I didn't hear you. My big sister always reminds me, don't rob other people of blessings that need to help you. Because it's a blessing, how do you feel when you help others? It's a blessing. So don't rob others of blessings to help you. Yeah.
I'm thankful for y'all's contributions and the thoughts. We're coming up on time for now, and so I just wanted to see if we can wrap up with any final questions. Yeah.
In your general counseling work, how often do you run into guilt feelings as a major force in their discomfort?
Every hour. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes I see about 7 people a day. And so, yeah, for about 7 hours a day, we're talking about people. Usually, I just think that people have such high expectations of themselves. And a lot of where we have to start is, what if it's just true, this is where you're at? And let's be there first.
Yep. what general percentage of those people consider faith as one force to deal with this?
I would say that's a little bit more mixed, because I don't work with everybody with a faith practice, but, for the people who might come from a faith practice, I think they're considering it. But really anchoring that in the scripture feels a little harder, right? Of like, well, can you find for me where Jesus is telling you that you should be in a different, it's like allowing yourself to access some compassion in what you're reading can be a challenge for sure. Yeah.
You may not believe this. I had a professor say to a class, don't work for A's. These are good grades. You need to be doing other things. So now when I have a job, especially when I don't like, I think I really like job or B job.
Nice. I love that. Yeah, when I work with students, I teach with Northwestern University, and I'll just say like, this is good enough, truly, like, I would really rather you support your wellness than like, this will not make a big difference in the grand scheme, you're gonna get the degree. Sometimes I'll say, please get degrees, but really, this, good enough is good enough.
Yeah, it's good.
Yep. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your time and attention, and wishing wellness for all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.